The twisted metal screamed against concrete as the riverside bridge buckled beneath Marcus Chen's weathered boots. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, but they would arrive too late. Below the churning waters of Miller's Creek, a silver Mercedes hung precariously from the bridge's collapsed section, its driver trapped inside as the vehicle swayed with each gust of autumn wind. Marcus didn't hesitate. The same hands that had rebuilt engines in his cramped garage apartment moved with practiced precision as he secured climbing rope around the bridge's remaining support beam. His 11-year-old daughter Lily watched from the safety of their pickup truck, her small face pressed against the window, eyes wide with the mixture of terror and pride that had become familiar since her mother's death 3 years ago. The woman in the Mercedes wore a designer suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in 2 months. Her dark hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon that somehow remained immaculate, even as her car dangled 40 feet above the creek. Through the windshield, Marcus could see her fighting panic with the controlled breathing of someone accustomed to high-pressure situations. Her name was Victoria Sterling, though Marcus wouldn't learn this until much later. As CEO of Sterling Industries, she commanded boardrooms with the same authority that Marcus wielded over stubborn carburetors. Her company's logo adorned half the buildings in their small Pennsylvania town, yet she had never noticed the quiet mechanic who kept the community's vehicles running, with parts salvaged from junkyards and a knowledge passed down through 3 generations of working hands. The bridge shuddered again, and Victoria's Mercedes slipped another 6 inches toward the water. Marcus tested his rope one final time before rappelling down the concrete wall, his movements fluid despite the urgency. He had learned to work under pressure during his years as a volunteer firefighter, before Lily's arrival had forced him to choose between dangerous service and being present for his daughter. Every rescue technique he had ever learned crystallized in this moment as he reached Victoria's car and began working to free her from the crumpled driver's door. Through the window, their eyes met for the first time. Victoria saw calloused hands moving with surgeon-like precision, steel gray eyes that held no judgment despite the obvious disparity in their circumstances, and a quiet strength that seemed to anchor the chaos around them. Marcus saw intelligence flickering beneath fear, the kind of sharp awareness that suggested this woman was accustomed to solving problems, just not the kind that required physical courage. The door finally gave way with a grinding protest of metal, and Marcus reached inside to unbuckle Victoria's seatbelt. His hands were gentle despite their urgency, mindful of potential injuries as he helped her from the vehicle. Above them, the bridge groaned ominously, hairline cracks spreading across the remaining concrete, like lightning frozen in stone. Without speaking, they both understood that time was running out. Marcus secured the safety harness around Victoria's waist, with movements that spoke of absolute competence. His fingers brushed against hers as he checked the clips, and Victoria felt something unexpected, a jolt of recognition that had nothing to do with their current perilous situation. There was something about his steady presence, the way he moved with purpose rather than panic, that reminded her of her own father before success had hardened him into someone she barely recognized. The ascent was a careful dance of trust and technique. Marcus guided Victoria up the rope, his voice calm and encouraging as he coached her through each movement. Below them, her Mercedes finally surrendered to gravity, plunging into Miller's Creek with a splash that sent spray 40 feet into the air. Victoria watched her car disappear beneath the muddy water, along with her laptop, her phone, and every symbol of the life that had consumed her for the past 15 years. Strangely, she felt more relief than loss. When they reached the bridge's intact section, Marcus didn't immediately release her from the safety line. His hands remained steady on the rope as Victoria caught her breath, her designer heels clicking against concrete that suddenly felt solid and real after the nightmare of hanging above the creek. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could smell motor oil and honest sweat, scents that reminded her of childhood visits to her grandfather's farm before corporate ambition had pulled her family toward glass towers and marble lobbies. Lily appeared at her father's side, having abandoned the truck the moment she was certain he was safe. At 11, she possessed the solemn maturity that often comes to children who have lost a parent too early. Her dark eyes studied Victoria with the frank assessment of someone young enough to see past expensive clothes to the person beneath. The emergency crews arrived with a symphony of sirens and flashing lights, but the drama was already over. Paramedics insisted on checking Victoria for injuries while firefighters secured the remaining bridge structure. Through it all, Marcus worked quietly to coil his rope and gather his equipment, deflecting praise with the uncomfortable modesty of someone unaccustomed to being the center of attention. Victoria found herself watching him as the paramedics examined her for concussion symptoms she didn't have. There was something mesmerizing about his economy of movement, the way he accomplished necessary tasks without wasted effort or self-congratulation. When a local news crew arrived and began setting up cameras, Marcus simply melted into the background, leaving Victoria to face the reporters alone. The news anchor, a perky blonde woman with aggressive curiosity, thrust a microphone toward Victoria's face. "Can you tell us what happened here today, Miss Sterling? How does it feel to owe your life to a local hero?" Victoria looked past the reporter toward Marcus, who was helping Lily into their pickup truck. Hero seemed like an inadequate word for what she had just experienced. He hadn't saved her for recognition or reward. He had simply seen someone in danger and responded with the instinctive courage that seemed as natural to him as breathing. "I was rescued by someone who understands that helping others isn't about heroism, it's about basic human decency," Victoria said, her eyes still fixed on Marcus and Lily. "Someone who knows the difference between what matters and what doesn't." The reporter pressed for more details, but Victoria's attention had already shifted. Marcus was driving away without seeking acknowledgement or even exchanging contact information. His pickup truck, dented and practical, disappeared around the corner while Victoria stood surrounded by news crews and emergency personnel, feeling oddly abandoned. That evening, Victoria sat in her penthouse apartment, wrapped in a cashmere robe that felt foreign against her skin. The view from her floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the town's lights spread below like scattered diamonds, but she found herself thinking about the interior of an old pickup truck and the way a small girl had looked at her father with absolute trust. Her assistant had already arranged for a replacement phone and laptop, efficiently rebuilding the digital infrastructure that governed Victoria's existence. But something fundamental had shifted during those minutes hanging above Miller's Creek. The constant pressure to achieve, to acquire, to advance, suddenly felt less urgent than it had that morning. She found herself wondering about Marcus and Lily, about their life in whatever modest home housed their obvious devotion to each other. Victoria's own apartment, for all its luxury, felt hollow by comparison. 3 days later, Victoria made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of attending the quarterly board meeting that would normally demand her complete attention, she drove through the working-class neighborhoods near the collapsed bridge, looking for a dented pickup truck and the man who had saved her life. She found Marcus's garage in a converted warehouse that had seen better decades. The sign out front read Chen Automotive Repair in faded letters, and the parking lot was filled with vehicles that told stories of careful maintenance and creative solutions. Through the open bay doors, Victoria could see Marcus bent over an engine, his concentration absolute, as he diagnosed some mechanical problem that would have baffled most people. Lily sat nearby at a small desk, working on homework with the same focused intensity her father brought to his repairs. The scene was so domestic, so genuinely peaceful, that Victoria hesitated before announcing her presence. She had spent years in boardrooms where every interaction was calculated for advantage, but something about this place demanded honesty rather than strategy. Marcus looked up when her shadow fell across his workspace, oil-streaked hands pausing in their work as recognition flickered across his face. His expression was welcoming but cautious, the look of someone who had learned to be careful about the motivations of those outside his small circle of trust. "Ms. Sterling," he said, straightening to his full height. "Are you feeling all right after the accident?" His concern was genuine, free of the obsequious politeness Victoria usually encountered from people who knew her reputation. There was no calculation in his voice, no attempt to leverage their shared experience into personal advantage. It was simply one human being checking on the welfare of another. "I'm fine, physically," Victoria replied, stepping into the garage's comfortable chaos. "But I realized I never properly thanked you. What you did took incredible courage." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. Anyone would have done the same thing. Victoria looked around the garage, taking in the careful organization, despite the apparent disorder, the way tools were arranged for efficiency rather than appearance. The bulletin board covered with pictures of satisfied customers and community events. This was a business built on relationships rather than profit margins, sustained by trust earned over years of honest work. "Not everyone would have done what you did," she said quietly. "Most people would have waited for professionals. Most people don't carry climbing rope in their truck." Marcus replied with a slight smile. "Occupational hazard of being prepared for anything. The conversation was interrupted by Lily approaching with her completed homework, seeking her father's approval before moving on to other activities. Marcus reviewed her work with the same attention to detail he brought to mechanical repairs, offering gentle corrections and genuine praise for her efforts. Victoria watched this interaction with growing amazement, recognizing the teaching relationship built on mutual respect rather than authoritarian control. After Lily disappeared into the back office to read, Marcus returned his attention to Victoria. She found herself reluctant to leave this space, where accomplishment was measured in problems solved rather than profits generated, where relationships seemed to matter more than transactions. "I'd like to help," she said suddenly, the words emerging before she fully understood what she meant to offer. Marcus's expression shifted to polite confusion. "Help with what?" "Your business. This community. Something that matters more than quarterly earnings reports." The offer hung between them, like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Marcus studied her face, searching for hidden agendas or patronizing charity that might poison whatever was growing between them. Instead, he saw the same person who had climbed that rope with determined courage, someone capable of more than her circumstances had previously demanded. "What did you have in mind?" he asked carefully. Victoria looked around the garage again, seeing potential where others might see limitations. "Your skills. This place. The trust you've built with people. It could serve so many more families if it had proper resources." "Not corporate takeover," she added quickly, seeing wariness creep into his expression. "Partnership. Investment that respects what you've already built." Over the following weeks, Victoria found herself spending increasing amounts of time at Chen Automotive, learning about Marcus's business and the community it served. She discovered that his garage functioned as more than a repair shop. Elderly customers brought their vehicles here not just for maintenance, but for the patience Marcus showed in explaining problems and options. Young people worked part-time in exchange for mechanical training that might lead to stable careers. Neighbors stopped by for advice on everything from car troubles to household repairs, trusting Marcus's judgment because he had never steered them wrong. The garage occupied a central role in the neighborhood's informal support network, and Victoria began to understand that any changes she suggested would need to honor rather than disrupt these relationships. She also learned about Marcus and Lily's life beyond the garage. How Marcus had inherited the business from his father, along with a reputation for integrity that was worth more than any advertising campaign. How he had raised Lily alone since his wife Elena's death from cancer, balancing single parenthood with the demands of keeping his business afloat. How every decision he made was filtered through consideration of what would be best for his daughter's future, creating a stability that wealth alone could never provide. In return, Victoria found herself sharing parts of her own story that she had kept carefully hidden behind professional success. The loneliness of executive leadership, where every relationship carried the potential for manipulation or betrayal. The way her drive for achievement had cost her personal connections until she found herself surrounded by admirers, but lacking true friends. The growing suspicion that her life's work might be ultimately meaningless if it served only to accumulate more power and possessions. These conversations usually took place after hours when the garage was closed and Lily was absorbed in homework or reading. Marcus would make coffee in the small kitchen attached to his office, and they would sit among the tools and parts, talking with an honesty that neither had experienced in years. Victoria discovered that Marcus possessed a keen intelligence that had been honed by practical application, rather than formal education. His insights into human nature rivaled anything she had learned in business school, and his ability to see solutions where others saw only problems reminded her why she had once loved the challenge of her work. Marcus, for his part, found himself drawn to Victoria's analytical mind and her growing understanding of how larger systems could be influenced to benefit ordinary people. She wasn't the entitled executive he had initially assumed, but someone genuinely committed to using her advantages in service of others. Her questions about his business were probing but respectful, focused on understanding rather than judging or changing. As autumn deepened into winter, their partnership began to take concrete form. Victoria arranged for a business loan that would allow Marcus to expand his garage without compromising his independence. More importantly, she helped him navigate the bureaucratic requirements for establishing a vocational training program that would teach automotive skills to unemployed residents of their community. The program would operate through the garage, combining hands-on experience with classroom instruction that could lead to industry certifications. Lily watched these developments with the shrewd observation skills that children develop when they've learned to read adult emotions for signs of threat or safety. She seemed to approve of Victoria's presence in their lives, though she maintained a careful distance that suggested previous experience with disappointment. Victoria respected this caution, understanding that earning a child's trust required consistent action rather than grand gestures. The breakthrough came during the first major snowstorm of the season, when Victoria's replacement car broke down outside the garage at the end of a particularly long planning session. Marcus insisted she wait inside while he diagnosed the problem, but the repair required parts that wouldn't be available until morning. Without hesitation, he offered to drive her home, leaving Lily to ride along rather than stay alone at the garage. The ride to Victoria's penthouse apartment was quiet, with Lily observing the transition from their familiar neighborhood to increasingly affluent areas. When they reached Victoria's building, with its doorman and marble lobby, Lily's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. Marcus helped Victoria with her briefcase and papers, declining her invitation to come upstairs with the polite distance he maintained whenever their different worlds threatened to collide too directly. But Lily surprised them both by speaking up from the back seat. "Miss Victoria," she said in her serious 11-year-old voice, "do you get lonely living in such a big place by yourself?" The question hung in the air with the devastating honesty that only children can deliver. Victoria looked at this small girl who had lost her mother, but still radiated the security that comes from being truly loved, and felt something crack open in her chest. "Sometimes," she admitted quietly, "but I'm learning that loneliness isn't about how many people are around you, it's about whether those people really see who you are." Lily nodded, as if this made perfect sense, then returned to her observation of the building's opulent details. Marcus met Victoria's eyes in the reflection of the car window, and she saw understanding pass between them. They were both people who had learned to be careful with trust, who had built walls around themselves for protection. But something was happening that felt stronger than caution, something worth the risk of being seen. The vocational training program launched on a cold February morning with 12 students and more hope than anyone dared to express aloud. Victoria arrived early to help with registration, dressed in jeans and a practical sweater that felt foreign but somehow more honest than her usual business attire. She watched Marcus welcome each student personally, taking time to understand their backgrounds and goals, treating them with the same respectful attention he gave his wealthiest customers. The students were a diverse group, united by their need for skills that could lead to stable employment. Recent high school graduates uncertain about their futures, middle-aged workers displaced by factory closures, immigrants seeking credentials that would be recognized in their new country. Victoria saw in their faces the same determination she remembered from her own climb up the corporate ladder, the same hunger for opportunity that had once driven her to sacrifice everything else in pursuit of success. As the weeks passed, Victoria found herself taking on a more active role in the program than she had originally planned. Her business skills proved invaluable in securing partnerships with local employers who agreed to interview graduates for entry-level positions. Her network of professional contacts opened doors that would have remained closed to students from Marcus's neighborhood. But more than her influence, Victoria brought genuine enthusiasm for the work being done, a sense of purpose that had been missing from her corporate achievements. She began spending entire days at the garage, working alongside Marcus to solve the 1,000 small problems that emerged in any new venture. They developed a comfortable partnership, her strategic thinking complementing his practical expertise. Students began bringing their concerns to both of them, sensing that they formed a united team despite their different backgrounds. The success of the program attracted attention from city officials and business leaders who wanted to understand how it was achieving results that larger, more expensive initiatives had failed to produce. Victoria found herself in the unusual position of deflecting credit toward Marcus, whose patient teaching and genuine care for his students created the foundation that made everything else possible. For the first time in her professional life, she was part of something that felt more important than personal advancement. The transformation in Victoria was visible to everyone except Victoria herself. Her assistant noticed that she was leaving the office earlier and arriving later, delegating responsibilities she would once have micromanaged. Her board of directors observed that their CEO seemed more relaxed during meetings, less driven by the desperate need to control every variable. Employees remarked that Miss Sterling had become more approachable, more willing to listen to ideas from unexpected sources. But Marcus saw the change most clearly during their quiet conversations at the end of long days. The brittle efficiency that had once defined Victoria was softening into something more flexible and alive. She laughed more easily, admitted uncertainty without defensiveness, and asked questions motivated by genuine curiosity rather than strategic advantage. The carefully constructed persona of the successful executive was giving way to someone more fundamentally human. The crisis that tested their growing relationship arrived on a warm spring evening when Lily collapsed during a Little League game Marcus was coaching. Victoria had become a regular spectator at these games, finding unexpected pleasure in watching children pursue victory with pure enthusiasm rather than calculated ambition. When Lily crumpled to the ground clutching her chest, Victoria's business experience proved useless, but her capacity for action under pressure served them well. She coordinated with paramedics while Marcus held his daughter's hand, maintained communication with the hospital while he rode in the ambulance, and handled the dozens of practical details that needed attention when medical emergency disrupts normal life. At the hospital, as they waited for test results that would determine whether Lily's collapse was serious or simply exhaustion, Victoria experienced a fear more intense than anything she had felt in boardrooms or during the bridge accident. This wasn't her child, yet the thought of losing Lily felt like losing part of herself. The test revealed a minor heart irregularity that would require monitoring but posed no immediate danger. Lily's collapse had been caused by dehydration and overexertion, easily corrected with rest and attention to proper nutrition. But the scare had shaken Marcus more than he was willing to admit, reminding him how quickly life could change, how precious and fragile his small family really was. As they sat in Lily's hospital room, watching her sleep peacefully after the day's excitement, Marcus and Victoria found themselves talking about fears they had never shared with anyone. Marcus spoke about the constant worry of raising a daughter alone, the fear that he wasn't providing everything she needed, the guilt that came with loving someone so completely that their welfare became more important than his own survival. Victoria confessed her terror of caring about people again, after learning how much it hurt to lose them. Her recognition that success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. Her growing understanding that the walls she had built for protection had become a prison that kept out everything worth having. Lily woke during their conversation, observing the two adults who had become the center of her world, with the intuitive understanding that children possess about the important things. Without speaking, she reached for both their hands, creating a connection that felt as natural as breathing. In that hospital room, surrounded by the antiseptic smell and mechanical sounds of medical equipment, three people who had found each other by accident recognized that they had become something more intentional, something that deserved to be protected and nurtured rather than analyzed or feared. The wedding took place in Marcus's garage on a Saturday morning in early summer, surrounded by the tools and relationships that had brought them together. Lily served as maid of honor, wearing a dress she had chosen herself, and carrying flowers picked from the community garden that Victoria had helped establish behind the vocational training center. The guest list included students from the program, neighbors who had become friends, and a handful of business associates who were still adjusting to this version of Victoria Sterling. The ceremony was performed by Marcus's former fire chief, a man who understood the difference between promises made in crisis and commitments built through shared work. Victoria wore her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit by a seamstress who had learned her skills through the training program. Marcus borrowed a suit from his brother, who served as best man while marveling at the changes he had witnessed in his formerly work-obsessed sibling. The vows they exchanged were written together, reflecting their understanding that marriage was another form of partnership, requiring the same attention to detail and mutual respect that had made their business collaboration successful. They promised to build something together that honored both their individual strengths and their shared commitment to serving others. After the ceremony, as guests celebrated with food prepared by students from the culinary arts program Victoria had helped launch, Lily made a speech that surprised everyone with its maturity and insight. She spoke about learning that families could grow in unexpected ways, that love was something you chose rather than something that simply happened to you, and that the best parents were the ones who kept trying to become better people. Victoria listened to this 11-year-old girl speak about concepts that many adults never master, and felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the life she had stumbled into while hanging from a collapsing bridge. The speech was interrupted by the arrival of a news crew, the same aggressive reporter who had covered Victoria's rescue months earlier. But this time, Marcus didn't disappear into the background, and Victoria didn't face the cameras alone. They stood together as they explained their partnership, their programs, their belief that business success should be measured by community impact, rather than purely financial returns. The reporter seemed disappointed by their unified message of collaboration rather than individual achievement, but the story that aired that evening captured something authentic about the way love could transform not just personal relationships, but entire approaches to living and working. Later that night, after the last guest had departed, and Lily had fallen asleep in her new room in Victoria's penthouse, which they had converted into a home that reflected all three of their needs, Marcus and Victoria sat on their terrace overlooking the town where they had built their life together. Below them, lights marked the homes and businesses that had become part of their extended community, places where their programs had helped people find work, where their support had enabled families to achieve stability, where their example had inspired others to look beyond their own immediate needs. The garage continued to operate as both auto repair shop and training center, serving customers while preparing new mechanics for careers throughout the region. Victoria had restructured Sterling Industries to prioritize community investment alongside profitability, discovering that businesses could thrive when they viewed employees and neighbors as partners rather than resources to be exploited. Lily excelled in school while volunteering as a tutor for younger children in their programs, already demonstrating the leadership skills and social consciousness that her parents hoped would guide her future choices. As they talked about their plans for expanding the vocational programs to include construction trades and healthcare support skills, Victoria reflected on how completely her definition of success had changed. The metrics that once drove her quarterly profit margins, stock prices, market share, now seemed less important than enrollment numbers in their programs, job placement rates for graduates, and the gradual improvement in their neighborhood's economic stability. Marcus had discovered that his natural teaching abilities and practical problem-solving skills could impact far more lives when combined with Victoria's strategic planning and resource access. Together, they had created something neither could have achieved alone, proving that the most effective partnerships honored rather than erased individual differences. The bridge that had collapsed under Victoria's car had been rebuilt within 6 months, engineered to withstand forces that would have destroyed the original structure. Marcus had consulted on the project, providing insights about local conditions that helped ensure the new bridge would serve the community for generations. Sometimes they drove across it together, remembering the accident that had brought them together while appreciating the solid foundation that now connected both sides of Miller's Creek. Their story had become part of local legend, but not in the way that emphasized heroic individual action. Instead, people talked about the ripple effects that followed one person's willingness to help another, how that moment of connection had grown into programs that were changing lives throughout their community. Children in their programs learned not just technical skills, but also the importance of looking out for others, of using their abilities in service of something larger than personal advancement. The transformation was visible in ways both large and small, from the increasing number of local businesses owned by program graduates to the informal networks of support that had developed among neighbors who had learned to see themselves as part of a community rather than simply individual households. Marcus's garage had become an unofficial community center where people gathered to share information, solve problems, and celebrate successes together. Victoria's business had evolved into a model for responsible corporate citizenship that other companies were beginning to study and emulate. As their first anniversary approached, Lily announced that she wanted to throw them a party, not just for family and friends, but for everyone whose lives had been touched by their programs. What started as a child's generous impulse grew into a community festival that filled the entire block around the garage, with booths operated by program graduates, performances by local artists, and demonstrations of the skills being taught in their expanded curriculum. Standing together on the platform that had been erected for speeches, Victoria and Marcus looked out at hundreds of faces that reflected the diversity and resilience of their community. They saw recent immigrants who had found pathways to meaningful employment, teenagers who had discovered alternatives to the limited options they had once faced, older workers who had successfully transitioned to new careers after factory closures threatened their economic security. The festival was more than a celebration. It was proof that change was possible when people were willing to invest in each other rather than simply pursuing individual advantage. In her remarks to the crowd, Victoria spoke about learning that the most valuable bridges were the ones built between people, connections that could withstand the forces that threatened to divide communities along lines of class, education, or background. Marcus talked about discovering that the skills he had learned in one small garage could be multiplied when shared with others, creating a network of competence and mutual support that made everyone stronger. Lily, now 12 and increasingly confident in public speaking, thanked the community for welcoming her family and teaching her that home was not just a place, but a collection of relationships built on trust and shared commitment to each other's welfare. The speeches were followed by music and dancing that continued long into the evening. with children playing among the tables while adults shared stories and made plans for the coming year. As the celebration wound down and families began gathering their children for the journey home, Victoria and Marcus helped coordinate the cleanup effort, working alongside volunteers whose involvement in their programs had evolved into genuine friendship. Watching Lily distribute leftover food to elderly neighbors who lived alone, Victoria marveled at how naturally generosity had become a family value, how service to others had become as automatic as breathing for all of them. The garage would open again on Monday morning, welcoming both customers who needed repairs and students who were building new futures through technical education. Sterling Industries would continue its evolution toward a business model that measured success by community impact, as well as financial performance. And three people who had found each other during a moment of crisis would continue building a life that proved love could grow from the smallest acts of courage, when nurtured by consistent commitment to each other's growth and welfare. Years later, when Lily was preparing for college and considering her own career path, she would often return to the story of the collapsing bridge and the rescue that had brought her parents together. Not because she wanted to romanticize the accident, but because she understood that the real story was what happened afterward, the patient daily work of building trust, supporting each other's dreams, and using their individual strengths to serve their community. The bridge had been rebuilt stronger than before. The garage had grown into a center for opportunity and education, and 3 lives had been transformed by the simple recognition that helping others was not an obligation, but a privilege that made everything else meaningful.